Look at this photo from Rocky Mountain Sasquatch organization. A small white helicopter with the word fire stenciled in red on the side, hovering low over a stretch of dry forest. The door is open. You can see a crewman inside, yellow Nomex shirt, the kind wildlife fire crews wear. Now look to the right side of the frame. That is the important part. There is something dark and tall standing between the two trunks. The shape of it doesn't sit right. It has a head, it has shoulders, it has what appears to be one arm at its side. And it is not moving. It is standing there, watching.
The two men in that helicopter never saw what was watching them. The camera saw it. They only found out later, the same way a lot of the strangest evidence on this channel got found. Somebody pulls up the footage at home, scrolls to a frame they don't remember, and freezes. I personally think there is a particular category of Bigfoot evidence that is worth a different kind of look. Not because the photos themselves are bulletproof, because most of them are not, but because of how they got captured in the first place. The witnesses in these cases were never looking for a creature. They were filming their kids, filming their friends, filming a wedding anniversary, doing their jobs. The camera caught what their eyes did not. Over the next hour, I'm going to walk you through the photo you're looking at right now and through 4 other cases I was able to source, plus a few stories that have been sent to this channel that I cannot verify, but that fit the pattern too well to leave out. We will visit a city park in Spokane, Washington, a tourist train climbing through the San Juan Mountains of southern Colorado, a pre-dawn hike on a peak in northern Argentina, a researcher in New Mexico who has built his entire fieldwork method around this exact phenomenon. And then we will come back to the helicopter and we will talk about whether the dark shape in the trees is what some people say it is, or whether it is something far more ordinary that the human brain refuses to let go of. Let's get into it. First thing I want to do is give you the source on this image, because if there is one thing this channel stands on, it's being straight with you about where things come from. This photograph circulates through the cryptid research community via a group called the Rocky Mountain Sasquatch organization. They run a blog and a YouTube channel, and they function more as a curation and news aggregation operation than as a primary research outfit. People send them photos and stories and clips. They post and discuss. That is a legitimate role in this community, and most of what the broader audience sees about Bigfoot week to week passes through groups like theirs at some point. The narrator on the original clip introduces this photo and then immediately tells you the truth about where his information ends. In so many words, he says there isn't much known about the image. He says he wrote a blog article about it years ago and lost track of it. He says he doesn't have a confirmed location, a confirmed photographer, or a confirmed date. He guesses that the helicopter may be Australian based on the livery. And from that guess, he proposes that the dark figure in the trees might be a Yowie, the Australian cousin of Sasquatch we have talked about on the channel before. I want to be clear about how I read that. I personally respect a researcher who admits when he can't fully source something. That is the same standard I try to hold this channel to. When a video here has a weak link in its sourcing, I would rather flag it to you and have the conversation than smooth it over and hope nobody notices. So when RMSO says, in effect, here's an image, here's what we don't know about it, here's our best guess, that is not a failure. That is the floor of the room being honest. I want to build on that floor and walk you through what we can and cannot say, what we can see. The aircraft is a small light helicopter, the kind used for wildfire spotting, transport of small crews, and heli-tac work all over the world. The crewman is in yellow protective gear. The terrain is mixed open and forested, with the green of the brush in the foreground suggesting the area itself has not burned recently, even if there is a fire nearby. The dark vertical shape in the trees on the right is tall, narrow, dark, and stationary. There is a second, dark vertical shape further to the right, partly obscured, what we cannot confirm. We do not know who took this photograph or when. We do not know what country the helicopter is operating in. The simple fire livery looks distinctive, but it is not. That style of red stenciled lettering on a white airframe is used by Cal Fire contractors in California, by the United States Forest Service through its private operator pool, by British Columbia Wildfire Service in Canada, by multiple Australian state fire services, and by smaller agencies in half a dozen other countries. The helicopter alone does not tell us continent. The trees alone do not tell us much either. Eucalyptus, pine, mixed open forest. You see this kind of tree line in southeastern Australia, in the western United States, in northern Mexico, in the South Island of New Zealand. The image on its own will not anchor itself to a map, which means the Yowie identification is doing something specific that I want to point out without being unfair. It is a downstream guess. The chain is the photographer might have been Australian, therefore the location might be Australia, therefore the figure might be a Yowie. There's nothing wrong with following that chain as long as you also tell people you are following it. RMSO did. I want to do the same. Now the skeptic case, because we always do this and because this one is honest. The photograph was taken by someone observing a fire response. That means the area on the ground is either actively burning, has recently burned, or is being prepared as a fire line. In all three cases, the forest is going to contain a number of tall, dark, vertical objects called burned standing trees. Charred trunks, especially ones that have lost their tops to fire and are weathering down to a stark, dark column, are roughly the shape and posture of an upright figure. The brain is built to find people in patterns. When a column has a slightly thicker top and a slightly thinner middle, the brain reads head and torso. When the photograph is also low resolution, the brain has even less to push back against the interpretation. The skeptic does not have to do a lot of work to get from this photograph to a burned tree. So here's where we are at the end of this section. We have an image with no chain of custody past the curation step. We have a source that admits it. We have a figure that could be a creature and could be a charred trunk. Honest answer, I lean toward charred trunk, and I'm going to tell you that now rather than at the end. But I also think this image is interesting for a reason that has nothing to do with whether the figure is real, and that reason is the rest of the video. Because this photograph is a perfect example of how a real percentage of all Bigfoot evidence enters the world. Not as a witness raising a camera at a creature, as something nobody in the frame even knew was there.
That is how every piece of evidence on this channel gets handled. Source it, show its limits, give the skeptical real weight, and evaluate it. Subscribe if that is what you're here for.
Most Bigfoot reports begin the same way. A person sees something, they react, they process, they tell somebody, or they don't. The witness is the first link. Their senses, their attention, and their interpretation produce the report. But there is a smaller and weirder subset of reports that begin differently. The witness sees nothing in the moment. They're looking at their kid on the trail. They're filming their husband at a campsite. They are leaning out a train window taking video for their anniversary album. They are flying a helicopter and trying not to crash it into the canopy. They are not scanning for a creature. They are doing something else entirely. The camera, indifferent and wide, captures whatever is in front of it. Days, weeks, sometimes years later, somebody plays the footage back, and there is something in it that no one in the original moment ever knew was there. I call this the review epiphany because I don't know a better term for it. The recognition happens in review, not in person. There's a real reason this pattern exists, and it is not mystical. It is how vision works. When you stand in a clearing and look at your daughter 10 feet away, your attention narrows. Your peripheral vision is technically receiving data from the whole field, but your brain is throwing most of it away in real time. The signal in your daughter's face is what gets through. The shadow at the edge of the tree line 30 yards behind her is mostly noise to your conscious mind. You're looking past it without seeing it. A camera lens does not work that way. It does not have a daughter, it does not have attention. It records everything in the field uniformly. If something is back there, the sensor recorded it whether the photographer knew or cared. That is one reason a real percentage of the strongest looking still images and video clips in this whole field come from review rather than from real-time sighting. The witnesses were looking somewhere else. The camera wasn't. But I want to be honest about the other side of this because I owe you that, and because the skeptical case here is strong. The same indifferent camera that captures the deep background in every frame also captures every shadow, every stump, every burned trunk, every odd pile of brush, every shape that the human brain will eventually find a person in if you stare at it long enough. The brain is built to find people. Face pareidolia is one of the most well-documented perceptual phenomena in psychology. Show a person enough random visual noise and they will eventually see eyes in it. Eyes, a head, shoulders, a posture. The longer they look, the more confident they get, which means the review epiphany pattern is also the pareidolia pattern. Anybody who scans enough background frames will eventually find a person-shaped thing in the foliage. Not because the person was there, because the brain is doing what the brain does. I personally think the honest answer is that this pattern probably produces more false positives than real ones. I think a lot of what gets posted under this category is shadow and tree and wishful interpretation. But I also think you cannot dismiss the entire category because if a genuine sighting ever does enter the world through this door, it will look exactly like the 10 cases that did not. You cannot tell them apart from the outside. The pattern is the pattern. You can decide what it means for any given case, but you cannot decide what it means for all of them at once. So with that as the frame, let me show you 4 cases. The first one is well known to anybody who has followed Bigfoot footage in the last 15 years, because it got national news coverage when it surfaced. A young woman in Spokane, Washington, identified to the local press only by her first name, was at a city park on the river called Downriver Park. Downriver is a wooded park on the Spokane River with a network of trails, picnic shelters, and stretches of pine and ponderosa woodland that get surprisingly thick the further you walk from the parking areas. People run there, people hike there, people walk dogs there. It is not a remote location. She was there with friends. They were hiking the loops, the way you do on a normal day in a normal park. At some point, she pulled out her phone and shot video of the group walking through one of the wooded sections. The phone was an iPhone. The footage was casual, the way phone footage of friends always is. Nothing in the act of filming was unusual. She went home. Sometime later that evening or the next day, she played the video back. And in the deep background of the frame, walking across the woods at a distance, was a figure she did not remember being there. The figure is tall, dark, walking on 2 legs, moving roughly perpendicular to the camera's line of sight, the way somebody crossing your path looks when you are filming forward and they are walking from the left side of the frame toward the right, distant enough that you cannot make out a face or fine detail, close enough that you can see proportions and gait. It does not stop. It does not look at the camera. It is not, as far as you can tell, aware that it is being filmed. She uploaded the clip to YouTube. It picked up speed quickly. Within a few weeks, it had been viewed roughly 700,000 times. The local Spokane news station, KXLY, picked up the story and interviewed her. From KXLY, it traveled to national outlets. She told reporters, in her own words, that she had never given the topic much thought before this happened, but that after seeing what was in her own footage, she was not as sure of her skepticism as she had been. Now, here's where I want to bring in the skeptic, because the skeptical case on this one is, in my opinion, one of the better arguments against the entire category. It is not about the resolution of the footage, it is about the behavior. The top voted comment on the YouTube upload, at the time it was getting its viral traffic, made an observation that I think is worth taking very seriously. The commenter pointed out that any animal living in those woods, or any human living there for that matter, would not casually stroll across an open line of sight while a group of intruders was walking through its territory. A real wild animal would do one of three things. It would stay hidden, it would leave the area undetected downwind before anybody got close, or in rare cases it would confront. What it would not do is walk on its own line at its own pace across the field of view of a group of strangers. That is not how wild animals behave. That is, the commenter pointed out, exactly how a person in a costume behaves. I personally think that is the single best argument against this entire category of evidence, and I would rather give it the floor than try to talk around it. The behavior in the Spokane footage does not match what you would expect from a real, reclusive, intelligent forest animal. It matches a person walking through the woods. The one honest counter is that we don't actually know what Bigfoot behavior looks like, because nobody has documented one specimen carefully enough to characterize it. We are using stories to build a profile and then using that profile to dismiss new reports for not matching it. There is a circularity there. It does not save the Spokane footage. It just means the skeptical argument is not airtight either. It is very good. Where I personally land on Spokane, probably a person in a suit, probably somebody who knew the park, knew the woman was filming, and walked the line on purpose. Probably one of the better hoaxes of the early smartphone era. But I will say, the most interesting thing about this case is not the figure, it is that she did not notice him while she was filming. That is the pattern this video is about, even if the figure himself is a person in a costume.
Sometimes the answer on this channel is, yeah, probably a hoax. And I'm going to tell you that. Honest analysis is honest analysis, even when it points away from the thing the video is about.
The second case is more recent, and it complicates the pattern in a way I want to be honest about, because the witnesses noticed the figure during the trip, not after, which means functionally it is not pure review epiphany. I am including it anyway because the structural shape of the case is the same, and you will see what I mean in a minute. The witnesses are Shannon and Stetson Parker, a married couple, 10th wedding anniversary. They took a ride on the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad, which is one of the great American train rides if you have never done it. The line was built in the late 1800s for hauling silver and gold ore out of the mountains. Today it is a tourist line, coal-fired, running narrow gauge steam through some of the most rugged country in Colorado. It threads up through the San Juan Mountains north of Durango, climbing through canyons and overpasses, passing through forest country that very few roads access. They were sitting in the open car. The train was moving. Stetson saw something on the mountainside off to the side, far enough away that you would not have made out the shape unless you happened to be looking at it directly. He said to his wife, more or less, "I think that is a Bigfoot." She raised her phone and started taking still photos. A passenger sitting nearby, identified to reporters as Brandon, took out his phone and started video. He got about 18 seconds of footage before the train carried them past the line of sight and into the next bend. In the frame of those 18 seconds on the side of the mountain, there is a dark shape against the sage and the lighter rock and grass of the hillside. It does not move much in the 18 seconds. It looks crouched or kneeling or hunched. It blends into the background nearly to invisibility. If you are not told where to look, you might not find it on a first pass through the clip. The Parkers the story went would have been on the fence about whether Bigfoot was real before this trip. After it, they told reporters they were no longer on the fence. The New York Post picked the story up. Fox News and other outlets followed. Their Facebook post about it spread on its own through cryptid community channels. They were not seeking attention. They were on an anniversary trip, and something happened to them, and they posted about it the way you post about your trip. Why do I include this case if they noticed it in real time? Because of what they could and couldn't do about it. They were on a moving train. They could not stop the train, get off, walk over, get closer, examine the area, or follow up. They could not improve the photo or the video. Whatever was on that hillside was going to stay on that hillside, and they were going to keep moving. Their entire capacity to engage with what they had seen was the 18 seconds of footage and Shannon's phone photos, which means the case lives or dies on the review, not the sighting. They did not really see what they saw until they pulled up the photos later. The structure is the same as the Spokane case. The witness was in motion, the field of view was wide, the figure was at distance, and the meaning of the moment was decided afterward by looking at the recording. Now the skeptical case here. It is geometric and it is strong. The photographs and the video were taken from a moving train, through a moving open-air window, at significant distance. The lens on the phone is not great. The figure is far enough away that in the 18 seconds, it does not have to move very much for the camera to lose it against the sage. Could it be a person in dark clothing crouched on the hillside? Possibly a hunter, possibly a hiker who wandered off the marked trails? Yes, easily. Could it be a black bear at distance, foraging on a hillside, occasionally rising to a more upright posture as bears will do to look around or reach a higher branch? Also, yes. Could it be a slightly oddly shaped rock or shadow that the brain locked onto because Stetson said the word Bigfoot before the photos were even taken, priming both his wife and Brandon to film what he had already identified? Honestly, also yes. The priming problem is real, and I want to flag the priming problem specifically because the cryptid community does not always wrestle with it hard enough. Once one person says the word, the entire group's perception of the next 10 seconds is contaminated. The witnesses on that train were not 3 independent observers. They were 3 people, one of whom had said Bigfoot out loud, all of whom then aimed cameras at the spot he had named. That does not mean they did not see what they say they saw. It does mean their accounts cannot be treated as fully independent corroborations. If you watched our video on the 10 Bigfoot hotspots, you will remember that Colorado made the honorable mentions list. The San Juan corridor specifically, with its mining-era history of strange creature accounts and its modern handful of named sightings, is one of the secondary clusters in the Western record. So at the very least, the Parkers were riding through a region that has a history of these reports, which is not nothing even if it is also not enough. Where I land on Durango, I think the most likely explanations are a hunter, a hiker, or a bear. I think the second most likely explanation is that the figure was approximately what they thought it was. I do not think those 2 probabilities are close, but I do think the case is worth telling because the photo lives in review, the way the Spokane footage does, and because the priming problem is honest enough to admit out loud. Third case. This one is recent, July of 2025. The location is Cerro San Bernardo, which is a low forested mountain that sits directly next to the city of Salta in northern Argentina. The peak is famous regionally. There is a cable car that runs up to the top, a small chapel, and a network of trails that switch back down through the trees. People hike it. Tourists ride the cable car. It is a thing you do when you visit Salta. Before dawn one morning, a young man identified to the regional press only as Tito was hiking back down the mountain. The local news reports described the time as around 5 in the morning, which means he and his companions were probably summit walkers who had gone up overnight to be on top for sunrise and were descending in the half-light. It was cloudy, but the visibility was decent. The cloud was atmosphere rather than fog in his telling. The trees were wet. The trail was empty. On the way down, he says, he and his hiking partner heard something rustling in the trees off the trail. It was the kind of sound you cannot ignore once you have heard it. Heavier than a small animal, not in the rhythm of wind. They stopped. They looked. And there was something there between the trees that he later described to the press as big, hairy, and hunched over. He took a picture. The picture, by his own admission, came out blurry. He has not publicly released a clean version of it. Local outlet Que Pasa Salta covered the story. A handful of English-language cryptid sites picked up the report afterward. Now here's where the case becomes specifically interesting for our video. Tito did not know what he had seen. His partner didn't know either. They got down the mountain. He showed the photo around to friends and family, and the person who identified the creature was his grandmother. She did not say Bigfoot. She did not say Yowie. Sasquatch was not in her vocabulary. She said the word Ukumar. The Ukumar is the regional version of the same creature this channel has covered around the world. Across northern Argentina, southern Bolivia, and Peru, indigenous and rural communities tell stories that go back generations of a large, hair-covered, upright forest being living in the cloud forests and the foothills of the eastern Andes. Different name, same shape. The witnesses don't describe a bear, even though spectacled bears live in the same region. They describe something that walks on 2 legs, that has a recognizable face, that is more like a man than like an animal. If you saw our 4 cryptids video, this should feel familiar. The Sasquatch in the Pacific Northwest, the Yeti in the Himalayas, the Yowie in Eastern Australia, the Almas in the Caucasus, the Yeren in central China, the Mapinguari in the Amazon, and the Ukumar in the Eastern Andes. Different continents, different languages, different millennia. The same creature described independently by cultures that could not possibly have copied each other. And the most interesting thing about Tito's case for the purposes of this video is the same thing as the Parker case. He saw something in the moment, but the meaning of what he saw arrived later. The photo, blurry as it is, only became evidence when his grandmother walked into the room and looked over his shoulder and said the regional word for the creature. The interpretation came on review, even though the sighting did not. Honest flag on this one, the photo has never been publicly released in a verifiable form. The original Spanish language reporting from Que Pasa Salta is the strongest source, and the English language derivative coverage adds nothing on top of it. So I'm telling this case as a recent regional sighting that fits the pattern of this video, not as photographic evidence on the level of Spokane or Durango. The value of including it is the cultural overlay, not the picture. The 4th case is not a sighting, it is a methodology, and the reason I'm including it in this video is that the methodology is essentially a person treating the review epiphany pattern as a research approach instead of an accident. In February of 2024, New Mexico Magazine published a long-form feature on the search for Bigfoot in New Mexico. The article followed a number of researchers in the state, including a man identified by his last name, Payan, who has been working the area around Cloudcroft, in the Sacramento Mountains in the south of the state for years. Payan is a photographer. That is his entry point to the field. He approaches the question with a camera in his hand and a methodology that, when you hear it, will sound very specific. He does not try to film a creature directly. He told the reporter that the creature, in his view, is too well camouflaged for that. By the time you have raised the camera and pointed it at the spot is empty. Instead, what he does is this. He goes into the woods, he moves through areas where he has heard noises before, or where he has, in his own words, gotten what he calls that heebie-jeebies feeling. The kind of feeling that comes over hikers in certain stretches of certain forests for reasons most of us cannot articulate. And in those places, he turns his camera on and he pans. Wide arcs through the trees. He does not zoom. He does not try to spot anything in real time. He just records the environment. Then he goes home and he reviews. He scans through the footage frame by frame. He zooms in. He looks for faces in the gaps between trees, in the shadow at the base of a slope, in the dark between two trunks. He is looking deliberately for review epiphany content. He is treating the pattern of this video as the data source. And the New Mexico Magazine article notes dryly that Payan has accumulated a substantial collection of images he believes show faces in the woods. I want to be honest about how this methodology lands for me because I think there is a real tension in it, and the tension is worth surfacing. On one side, it is internally consistent. If you genuinely believe the creature is hyper-vigilant and avoids direct human attention, then the only data you will ever get on it is going to come from times when you, the observer, were not paying attention to it. Recording without watching and reviewing later follows logically from that premise. It is not a stupid methodology. There is a real argument under it. On the other side, this methodology maximizes the exact failure mode the skeptic is most worried about. If you scan thousands of frames of dense forest looking specifically for face-shaped patches of shadow and light, you will find them. Not because faces are there, because the brain is built to find faces, and you have just spent an hour priming it to do exactly that on a screen full of noise. The signal-to-noise problem is severe, and Payan's method does not solve it. It makes it worse. I am not endorsing the method. I am also not dismissing it. I am noting that a working researcher in this field took the review epiphany pattern seriously enough to build his entire fieldwork around it. That, on its own, tells you the pattern is real. The pattern existing as a phenomenon does not require the creature to be real. It exists because of how cameras work and how human attention works, whether there is anything to find inside it or not. Running this channel for as long as I have, people send me things. Not all of it is verifiable. Most of it I cannot chase down with the time and resources I have. Some of it is repackaged stuff from other corners of the internet that I can identify on site. But a real percentage is first-hand, and a real percentage of that first-hand material has the specific shape of the cases we have just walked through. Somebody looking through old photos, somebody scrubbing through trail cam footage, somebody pulling drone footage off a card after a job, and finding something. I want to share 3 of them with you because they fit this video and because I think the audience deserves to know what kinds of things come into the inbox of a channel like this one. I am not naming the senders. I cannot independently verify any of these. I'm telling them because they fit the pattern, not because I'm making a claim about them. Treat them the way you would treat a story a friend tells you over a beer. Listen, weigh it, decide for yourself. Story 1. A viewer who said he works as a wildlife photographer up on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State sent in trail footage he had been collecting for an elk migration project. He had been running cameras on a couple of routes for years. The folders on his hard drive were thousands of clips long. He went through them in editing software at 2 times normal speed. He told me he stopped on instinct on a frame that he could not, in his words, explain why he stopped on. He scrubbed back. He found something he could not identify standing at the very edge of the camera's range, partially hidden, large. He did not post it anywhere. He did not want to. He sent it to me and asked specifically that I not share it, so I'm not going to. The reason I'm telling you about it is that the man's first reaction was not excitement. It was that he wanted the image off his computer. He told me he did not sleep well for a few nights after he saw it. Story 2. A retired hunter in northern Minnesota sent us a digital scan of a printed photograph from 1994. The photograph is the kind of trophy photo you take with a deer you have shot. The deer is propped against a log, the hunter is kneeling behind it, rifle laid across his lap. Classic frame. He had this photo in an album in his basement for almost 3 decades. His granddaughter scanned the album for him last year, the way younger family members do for older relatives these days. She showed him the digital version on her laptop. He saw in the deep tree line behind him, 40 or so feet back, partially behind a trunk, something tall and dark and not quite proportioned right. He had no memory of anything being there. He told me in the email he sent us that he stared at the image for a long time, and then he asked her to delete the scan. She did not delete it, she kept it, she sent it to him on a separate file, he sent it to us, he said he was not sure why. Story 3. A volunteer with a search and rescue team in the Smokies sent us drone footage from a body recovery operation. I will not say more about the recovery than that, out of respect for the people involved. The drone operator was scanning a hillside, looking for what he had been told to look for, and he did not see anything else in the moment. That night, watching the playback at the team's base, a different volunteer leaned in to look at the screen and asked him to pause it. There was, on a wooded slope 100 yards off the search line, a shape that should not have been there. The team did not, at that point, redirect any of their search. They had a job to do, and they did it. The footage went into the team's archive. 3 stories, 3 people who, in their accounts to us, were doing something else entirely when their cameras caught whatever they caught. I want to be very clear with you about what I am and am not saying. I'm not saying any of those 3 stories is true. I'm not saying any of them is false. I am saying they fit the pattern. The pattern is real. Whether the figures in the frames are real is a separate question. And I want to make one ask of you here. If you have one of these, drop it in the comments. Not a link to a viral photo somebody else took. Your own. The pattern lives in the aggregate of viewer experience, not in the cherry-picked cases I can pull off the news. If you have a photo from years ago that you only noticed something in later, or a clip you came back to and saw differently the second time through, that is exactly what this video is about. Tell us, drop it under this video. We read the comments.
If you've gotten this far and found this useful, the subscribe button helps the channel more than you know. And also, leave us a comment telling us where you are watching from.
Let me step back from the individual cases for a few minutes and look at the pattern as a whole, because I think there are really only 3 honest reads on it, and I want to lay them out one at a time. The first read is the pro-existence read. It goes like this. If a real, intelligent, reclusive primate is out there, the review epiphany pattern is exactly the capture pattern you would expect. The creature is good at avoiding direct attention. It can model where a human is looking. It can step behind a tree when the eyes are on it. But it cannot model the wide, passive field of view of a camera that the human is not actually paying attention to. The camera is in the human's hand, but the human is looking at his daughter or his wife or the fire he is trying to land a bucket on. The wide, indifferent lens captures the creature the way no human eye in that clearing ever could. Under this read, the pattern is not a coincidence. It is what we would predict in advance. The second read is the anti-existence read. It is just as honest as the first. It goes like this. The exact same logic that makes the pattern look like confirmation of a creature is what makes the pattern impossible to falsify. Any creature whose entire identity only appears when nobody is looking can be replaced point for point by anything else that the human brain finds in random background noise when given enough time and motivation to find it. The pattern does not distinguish a real creature from a shadow in a tree. It cannot tell the two apart from inside the data. So the very thing that makes the pattern look compelling is what makes it useless as evidence. You cannot escape that. It is a real problem, and I'm not going to pretend it is not. The third read is the one I personally find most honest, and it is the lane this channel tries to occupy. You do not have to pick between the first two. You can hold both. You can notice that the pattern is real, that it is consistent across decades and continents and witness types, that it lines up with how cameras and human attention work, and at the same time you can notice that the pattern, by its own structure, cannot resolve the question of what is in the frames. Both of those statements are true at once. The pattern is real. The pattern is also indeterminate. What the pattern actually tells you in the third read is something narrower but useful. It tells you something about how this kind of evidence enters the world, regardless of whether the creature is real or not. It tells you why you almost never get a clean, centered, well-lit, well-resolved photograph of a Bigfoot in the entire library of cryptid photography. Because if the creature is real, by the structure of its behavior, you would not. And if the creature is not real, by the structure of the photos being generated, you also would not. Either way, the pattern produces the kind of evidence the pattern produces: grainy, distant, background, found in review. So the photos are the seismograph, not the earthquake. They record the shape of something happening, but they cannot tell you on their own whether the something is a creature or a perceptual illusion. The settlement on that question, if it ever comes, will not come from these photos. It will come from physical specimen, from full, unambiguous DNA, or from video at distance and resolution we currently do not have. Until that day, the photos are useful for one specific thing. They tell you what the shape of the question is. They do not tell you the answer. And that is okay. I personally think a lot of the people in this field rush to make the photos answer the question when they cannot. I would rather use the photos for what they are good for. They are good for showing you the structure of the phenomenon. They are good for telling you where to look. They are good for raising the question loudly enough that the people who could answer it, with the resources to do so, eventually do. Now let's go back to the photograph we opened with. Same image, same fire helicopter, same crewman in yellow Nomex, same dark shape in the trees on the right, and the second one further out. Nothing about the photograph has changed in the last 50-some minutes. What has changed is what you know now. Let me give you the limits one more time in context. We do not know who took the photo. We do not know where it was taken. We do not know when. The Yowie identification rests on a guess about the helicopter livery, and the livery does not actually anchor to any specific country. The dark shape in the trees could be a charred standing trunk, and given that the helicopter is operating in or near an active fire response zone, charred trunks are the local geometry. You have heard all of this. You have heard a researcher admit to it on the original clip. But you have also now seen the pattern this image lives inside. The crewman in the helicopter was focused on his job. The pilot was focused on his job. Neither of them was looking at the tree line. The tree line was not part of their problem in that moment. The camera, in whoever's hand it was, captured the tree line anyway, because cameras do that. And whatever is in those trees, the person filming did not know it was there. The review epiphany pattern is, more than anything else, what this photograph is a specimen of. I still personally think the figure is most likely a burned trunk. I'm not going to change that read because I walked you through 5 other cases. The skeptic case on the original image is the skeptic case on the original image, and the other 4 cases do not strengthen or weaken it. They sit alongside it. But I am going to tell you what I think the photograph is genuinely useful for. It is useful because it shows you the posture of evidence in this field. A crew doing a job, a camera in someone's hand, pointed not at the woods but at the work, a tree line going by in the background, and then later a person at home, looking at the image on a screen, finding something nobody had seen and not being sure what to do about it. That is the shape of the question. The Spokane footage was that shape. The Durango footage was that shape. Tito's pre-dawn hike in Salta was that shape. The Payan method tries to industrialize that shape. And the inbox of this channel contains week after week more of that shape than I have time to read. Last note on the helicopter image specifically, because we are going to come back to this territory in a future video. We have sitting on the slate a deep dive on the millionaire Tom Slick. Slick spent a very large amount of his own money in the late 1950s trying to solve the photographic evidence problem we have just walked through by funding expeditions and field operations designed to get the kind of close-range, centered, well-resolved evidence that the review epiphany pattern systematically denies us. The lessons from how that effort went and what it ran into are very relevant to the question of why we are still here in the 2020s talking about images like this one. That video is coming. If you have been watching the channel for any length of time, you know I try to end every one of these with a personal verdict, framed plainly so you know where I stand and so you can argue with me if you disagree. On the original photograph, the Rocky Mountain Sasquatch image of the fire helicopter and the figures in the trees, I personally think the most likely explanation is a burned standing trunk in the background of a fire response photo and a second burned trunk further to the right. I do not think the figure is a Yowie. I do not think the image is a Yowie. I think the Yowie reading is a downstream guess from an unanchored helicopter livery, and I think the underlying figure is forest geometry. On the broader pattern this image lives inside, I personally think the review epiphany category contains a lot of false positives, probably more than it contains real signal. I also think you cannot dismiss the category as a whole because if a genuine sighting ever enters the world through that door, it will be indistinguishable from inside the data from the cases that didn't. The pattern is real even when the figures in any given frame are not. The pattern itself tells you something about why we don't have better evidence than what we have. The good photographs are not going to come from this category. They're going to come from somewhere else. From a specimen, from DNA, from a long lens telephoto on a research camera that knew what to look for in advance. Until then, treat the photos as the seismograph and not the earthquake. If you found this useful, you might want to go back and watch our FBI Bigfoot file video, which is the inverse of this one in a way I think is interesting. That video covered what happens when a single piece of physical evidence gets formal institutional scrutiny. This video is about what happens when nobody scrutinizes at all and the evidence enters the world by accident anyway. You should also see our wildland firefighter video for the on-ground witness counterpart, and our Patterson-Gimlin piece for the case where the photographer was actually trying to film a creature. This video is the inverse of all three.
If this is the kind of video you want more of, subscribe, hit the bell button, and drop a comment with your own version of this story. I'm Alex, and I'll see you in the next one.